How's everybody doing? Welcome to our Ask an Angler, Saugeye, and Walleye fishing tips. So, we're going to kind of go through just the whole gambit of what you can use for walleye and saugeye. There's lots of different methods to catch the fish. You can be using bait, you could be using artificial, whether it be cast and retrieve, trolling. So we're just going to kind of go through all of the different setups that you may find successful throughout the state for the fish. We'll kind of talk about what lakes are good lakes to fish at. And this is meant to be conversational. So as we go along, if I'm moving too fast through a subject or bait, or you have a question or anything like that, go ahead and type it in the chat bar and we'll just address those as we go along. So I'm going to kick it off with just a little bit of background on the two species of fish. So Oklahoma has 4 species that fall into the true perch family, Percidae. That's going to be our walleye, our saugeye, our sauger, and then common log perch, which are almost never encountered by anglers. They're small darter fish in the perch family. Sauger are native to Oklahoma. They live in the Arkansas basin, and that's what we cross with walleye to get our saugeye. Walleye are not native to Oklahoma. They're a northern fish from states around the Great Lakes, Minnesota, Wisconsin, up into Canada. And so we cross female walleye with male sauger, and then we get our saugeye. The main difference between walleye and saugeye being on their dorsal fin. Walleye are going to just have the same kind of goldish green, brown color, all one color through their fins. And then saugeye are going to be more like sauger, and they're going to have banding and spots in between each one of their dorsal rays. So it might look like a checkerboard, kind of like a black crappie will go through there. So, different types of water quality across the state. The color of the skin of the fish is going to be affected by the water clarity. So sometimes, between a walleye and a saugeye, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. But the one true difference you're always going to get is saugeye are going to have some type of spotting and banding on that spiny dorsal fin off the top. So we'll start out with kind of some hard baits for walleye and saugeye. So they are a cold water fish, so you have more luck with them in shallower water from February, March into early April. And then again, as we get into kind of the later fall, October, November, you're going to see more fish kind of pushed up into shallower water that has been above 70 degrees since, May. They really like water temps that are between 50 and 70 degrees is kind of their comfort zone. Oklahoma, last year we had a big deep freeze where our lakes froze, but most of the time that, freezing is not an issue. So fish aren't really living in water temps that are down into the high 30s, into the low 40s. Most of Oklahoma in the winter, we're only getting down to low 50s on our lakes. Some of them might be high 40s, higher up in the water column, but walleye and saugeye pretty much, they live their entire lives right down on the bottom. They love the bottom third of the water column, and that's how they feed. So all the baits and everything we're going to be talking about, we're fishing right off the bottom, within 2-3 feet of the bottom, with any type of lure that you're going to use. So with hard baits, you have a couple different options in the spring and the fall, especially in the low light hours. So they're not a nocturnal fish. They are active during the daylight, but because of the way that their eyes are built, they're kind of like deer. They're very sensitive to strong light. So they prefer those low light hours to move into shallow water where there's more light penetration. So typically you won't find them in too shallow of water near the banks until we start to get towards dusk. And then they'll be, for a couple hours after dusk until, start kind of a bite again a couple hours before dawn into like an hour after dawn. And then during the midday hours, so once the sun is up on the water, those fish just kind of push back out. So depending on what time of year it is and what they're relating to, they might only go out to the first drop. Other fish, they might retreat way out to main lake humps or dips. So really just keeping, on the bottom in those areas where you're going to be fishing. Dams are they really like hard structure, hard bottom. And then if there's any type of grass or weeds kind of around big drop offs where it's rocky bottom, they're going to really favor that. So here's kind of our first box of hard baits. Most of these would be considered they're minnow baits, but a lot of them are jerk baits. And with these, especially if you're trolling, obviously if you're fishing from the bank or you're fishing in a tailwater, all of these baits are going to be fairly shallow diving. So most of these baits are suspending baits. And bass fishermen with these, especially things like something like a ripstop, it's kind of got that tail back on the end, where these are meant to be quick jerk and they flash side to side and kind of roll, and then it's a very slow pause and rise. With walleye, you can just drag these right along the bottom. So if you're able to fish these from the bank, especially in the spring and coming up here as we get into the next full moon in October, as the water temps have come down a bit, and you're going to see saugeye and walleye get back up into those shallow, rocky, wind-blown areas. So points, coves, anything with rocky outcroppings that kind of dump out into deeper water fairly quickly, which is generally around points and dams. You're going to have that hard bottom structure that they like. And you can just cast these straight out and fish them like a jerk bait once you get them down on the bottom. But if you're just trolling them, these are great to put behind a bottom bouncing rig. So we'll get into the bottom bouncing rigs in a second. I just kind of wanted to show all the different bait profiles. Bright colors, purple backs like this are always tried and true. Some golds, something like this. These are always really good colors no matter where you're fishing at. And then just kind of our basic shad, kind of flashy things with lots of oranges, pinks, purples, yellows, something like this. So, very flashy, bright colors. A lot of times we're fishing right down on the bottom, and there's no light penetration down there, so the fish are needing a little bit of extra flash, and walleye just seem to really prefer the kind of those flashier colors. So, but even just a standard, threadfin shad, kind of like this, some yellow and some blue, and those all work. And most of the time when you find fish, you're going to find that they're not overly picky on what color you're throwing at them. It's really just a matter, usually a lot of the times it's size profile. How big's your bait? Are they feeding on big minnows? Are they feeding on small minnows, small shad? So a lot of times it's more of the size profile than it actually is the color scheme, because you're just getting a lot of flash out of these. So some other hard baits that are pretty tried and true. Again, we're looking for like long, slender type baits. So a box like this, we've got some bladed minnows, so with some spinners on them. And then again, just some long, slender diving baits. So for ones where you're casting from the bank, something maybe with a bigger, this is like a 9 to 11 foot diver, 11 to 13 feet. So these are good from the bank off of a dam when they're up, because you can get this down into deeper water. Whereas if we're out in the main lake and you're on a boat, kind of the lures that I just showed you, if they're not up, feeding in real shallow water where they're, the water depth that you're fishing at is less than 6 feet, and those fish are pushed up, where you can get those 0 to 5 foot different types of jerk baits and crankbaits that are really shallow diving. But if you're out into a little bit deeper water, or maybe it falls off quicker and you want to be down on the bottom, then something with a little bit bigger lip on it. But again, just slender shaped profile baits. Bass crankbaits tend to be a little bit shorter, a little fatter bodied, that are fished in the middle of the water column. Or most walleye baits that you'll find that are successful are going to be more of the long and slender type. So simple, just cast and retrieves with these. Deeper diving ones, I like to get up to where they can dive to 11 to maybe 13 feet. That way I can really slow down my retrieve. And a good thing to do with any of your crankbaits, especially if you are planning, and again, it's always a good idea to be able to bang these into the bottom. What I'll do with these baits is I'll remove the front treble hook right here, just get rid of that. I just pull that right off. And then on the back one, you can leave this treble hook on if you want. When you're cranking this down, it's going to be kind of in this motion. So as long as you're on hard bottom without a lot of hang-ups, wood, grass, you'll get away with the treble hook. It'll be up and it just looks like a minnow that's feeding along the bottom. But I'll always remove this front one. But a lot of times with these back ones, especially if I'm trolling, I'll just replace it with just a straight shank hook, just something like this. So this is a 2-aught hook, and I'll just put that instead of the treble. So when this is banging along the bottom, I only have one singular hook. It may, you might get bit occasionally where you don't get a good hookup with the single hook, but for the most part, it's going to save you these anywhere between $5 and $20 hard baits. You don't want to be snagging those up. And especially if you're fishing from the bank, you're fishing essentially uphill back at yourself. So when you're casting out, the bank, you're reeling back in this way. So every time that's hitting the bottom as it's dragging along, you could go up underneath the rock, underneath the log, catch grass, anything like that. So the less chance of there is for a hook to really grab into something hard, taking off all the treble hooks and either just leaving the back one or replacing the back one with a single straight shank hook point is going to go a long ways to saving you baits, because nobody likes losing hard baits. They're expensive. So let's see. Next, let's get into kind of bottom bouncing rigs. So there's lots of different types. You can buy prepackaged bottom bouncing rigs like Lindy rigs that come with the weight and everything. But basically the three different types of bottom bouncing approaches you're going to use are going to be with a weight that's something like one of these. So this is just your rock runner bait. And at your major retailers, your Bass Pros, your Cabela's, maybe even Academy, you're going to have, you're going to see these. So this is a rock runner. It's going to come in a package like this. That's what it's going to look like. And these are, again, kind of the same deal. These are Northland fishing tackle. This is Lindy fishing tackle. Same exact type of deal, just a little bit different, but they're meant to do the same thing. And they're going to come in a package that looks something like this. And then a Lindy rig is going to come with these little plum weights that look like this. So all of these presentations, they all have their, benefits. But really, with something like this, that's a little bit bigger, it might get wedged more often than one of these. But typically when you're trolling, these are going to bounce along the bottom, no problems. I very rarely ever get a weight hung up. Even ones like these, if I'm trolling. Now, if I'm casting straight from the bank, I'm wanting to get down on the bottom and use a bottom bouncing approach with the cast and retrieve from a fixed location, whether it be below a dam or just on the bank somewhere, then something like this might be a little bit more likely to get hung up. But um, it's kind of whatever you're comfortable with. These are going to come in a variety of sizes. If you're fishing from the bank, I recommend probably like a 1/4 ounce weight, maybe a 3/8. You want to have a little bit more feel when you're reeling from the bank. If you use those real heavy weights, it's going to keep you right on the bottom. Um, and a lot of times we're just using like little plastic worms or little grubs that are going to be behind a leader off of the bottom bouncer, and having a little bit lighter when you're reeling in is going to give you more of an opportunity. If you do happen to find a crevice or a stick or something that you need to flip it over, you'll find that flipping just a 1/4 of an ounce less on the bottom is going to help you hop up and over whatever it is you got stuck on. But when you're out in the main lake, or especially you're fishing from a vessel, whether it be a kayak or a boat or something, even a float tube, if you were paddling and kind of keeping a troll with a paddle, 1/2 ounce is usually good out to 25, 30 feet, depending on your troll speed. I'm a big advocate for all species to really just slow it down. So when I'm trolling, I'm just going fast enough that, if I probably let out, if I'm in 30 feet of water, anywhere between 15 and 30 feet of water, going to let out maybe 100 yards of line, somewhere between like 70 and 100 yards of line. A 1/2 ounce is plenty. That's going to get me down on the bottom. But if for some reason, you should be able to see your rod tip. So another thing with just the rods that you're using, if you're trolling out on the lake, a standard like 6'6" rod, 6 foot to 7 foot rod, somewhere in there. But I like a 6'6", just medium action rod for trolling. It has just enough of a soft tip on it that I can really tell that I'm on the bottom. If you're just floating this thing across the water column because you don't have enough line out or because you're moving too fast, your rod tip is going to, have some slack in it because it's going to be swaying. So you want to see just that rod tip just making a little bit of a bounce as this goes along the bottom, whether you're fishing with a harness crawler or a crankbait or some type of other artificial. You want to know that you're maintaining contact with the bottom. So having a medium action rod, you're out on a boat, you can fight a fish a little bit better. Now, if you're fishing from the bank, I like a medium heavy rod, no matter what I'm using, just because, if you hook into a good fish, you have lots of danger around you with snag ups and things like that. So I'll just elect for a little bit heavier. That way, if I'm dragging a bottom bouncer, or if I have a crankbait or I happen to get hung up, using 14-pound test or bigger of whatever I'm using. Again, a 6.5 foot to a 7 foot medium heavy rod. That's just going to help you get out of trouble a little bit more. But to each their own, whatever you're comfortable with. I've just found those to save me the most equipment along the way if you get hung up. So with these bottom bouncing setups, some of them, like a Lindy rig, is going to come with a swivel that's going to look something like this. And it's also going to come with they usually come in packs of 2 to 4, depending, but this is what it's going to come with. So you're going to get a weight that looks like this. You're going to get a hook that's already on a leader, and you're going to get a swivel that looks like this. And what you do is you put your weight onto your main line. So you bring your main line down, bring it through this with this end facing towards your rod tip. You don't want it back like this because it's going to be pulling towards your rod tip. So you want it face down this way. Same thing with something like this. Make sure that you're always faced where your main line comes through, that it's back like that. But what's great about these, if you're just using a worm, is this will unwind. So you take this apart. Every one of them is different. The harness crawlers, things like that. you can get these tangled up. Most of the time, you go from the hook side first, and it'll unwind. But sometimes they're just wrapped funny. So just go slow when you go to pull it out to make sure that you don't accidentally put a big knot in your line. But they come with a pre-molded loop, so they've already tied a nice little loop for you. And all that loop does is on this little piece right here, it's not really a snap swivel, it's more just kind of a tightly wound piece of metal on there. And you just work the loop and just pull it tight through that backside, and it's gonna pull down into the circle back there, just like that. And so you're left with about a 2-foot leader like this and one singular hook. I like these a lot for just still fishing. So if I'm below a dam or I'm on the bank, I love just a lindy rig like this with a 1/4 ounce or a 1/2 ounce weight, just depending on how far I want to cast it out, because I'm not worried about retrieving it. I'm just going to let it fall down to the bottom, reel up my slack so I'm tight lined on the bottom, and I'm just going to wind a night crawler onto this. So I don't have any live bait with me. So for all of anything where I'm talking about a night crawler, we'll just use a little fake artificial worm. But if this was my night crawler, I'd take it out and I just one end and you just work it on there. And I typically just kind of work it up, turning it over onto the hook until I just have the tail hanging and a good portion right here. And I'm just going to cast that out and let it sit. And what that's going to do is this free end of the worm, when it's down on the bottom, this end is going to be crawling and it's going to be giving off scent and motion, but it allows the free end to take. So your walleye and your saugeye, they're going to come up and you're going to get kind of a typical, if you trout fish with power bait or bottom fish a lot, you're going to get a pretty good dink, 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 dink. Now, if a largemouth comes along or a catfish comes along, usually that's going to be just a grab and scoop, and your line's going to get real tight, and you got to be paying attention to your rod because it might take off. So when you're using just a basic bottom approach where you're still fishing, you cast out and you just leave it there, make sure that your rod is secured, because you're apt to catch drum, largemouth bass. You might get into a carp, but you're more likely not to catch your target species by just fishing bait off the bottom. But it is a really effective way, especially in the spring and the fall, when especially saugeye, when they really congregate in super shallow water. Just fishing right off the bottom is a super easy way. It's a great way to take kids fishing. You want to take a family member or friend who maybe doesn't fish that much, and you don't want to be dealing with casting and retrieving, or if you don't have a boat where you can just go out and troll, something simple. This is as simple as it gets, just a bait. And you don't even have to buy a lindy rig. You can make one of these yourself. You don't need this type of swivel. Any swivel will work. You really don't even need a bottom bouncing weight when you're fishing from a fixed position. You could use an egg weight, any type of, just weight above a swivel that's going to hold you down to the bottom where you can get enough of a tight line. So I really like these when I'm fishing in a marina, or when I'm just kind of not really fishing that hard, just having fun at the lake. It's a great way to just keep a line in the water. And, in the spring and the fall, when the fishing is really good and really consistent with fish up, you can get into a lot of fish just doing that. The other bottom bouncers, so if we were to be fishing, in motion, whether that be cast and retrieve, but most of the time, any of these bottom bouncing presentations are going to be in association with trolling from your boat. It's just the easiest way to cover the most amount of water. You can get out into deeper water, you can get into bigger fish. And usually when you're fishing from the bank, it's at the time of year where what we're using to catch the fish is a little bit different. So we're not needing to get down into those depths. And so we'll kind of get into that. What do you connect the other end of the leader at the weight? So your main line, if I'll just grab one of these rods here. So if you were rigging up a bottom bouncing rig, here is our main line right here off of our rod. So you take your line, and if we're using a lindy rig, so here's our main line. This is what's attached to the end of our rod tip, and it's coming off of our reel. All we're going to do is we're just going to go through this side, making sure that the bottom curve is facing up the main line. So we have like that. And then typically we use this already and we're hooked up, but typically I would tie on my swivel before putting on your leader line that it comes with. Let's pop this off. But yeah, as you can see, they don't come off easy. So even though it's not a snap, you don't have to worry about that when you put it on there, that it's going to somehow kick off. So I'll just grab another one here. So we'd have our swivel. One end has a perfect eye on it. The other side has kind of that loop with the line like that, where you put your line on. So all I would do is just tie on your swivel. With these, you got a nice big eye on it. So Palomar knot works great, but whatever fishing knot you're comfortable with. So we put this on our main line, cinch that up, take our tag off, and then you would attach either your lindy rig, where we already have one of our pre-put together leaders with the hook already on it, like that. And you can put that on. Now, and you can do all this, like I said, with hooks and weights and swivels and make your own. It doesn't need to be a prepackaged one. The prepackaged lindy rigs come with something that looks like this, and the leader is about 2 feet. You can also buy prepackaged. So here's a few different options. These are prepackaged Snell hooked with leaders on them. So this one right here, this has an 8-foot leader on it with just a single hook. So just like the lindy rig setup that we just did, this is just going to have an 8-foot leader. So, if you want some more line out behind you, you can use you don't necessarily need to use a weight like that. You could use one of these. You could use a rock runner, a bottom bouncer, or anything like that. But they sell them prepackaged again. So they're going to have the loop on it that's going to go onto your swivel. These ones right here, these have 2 hooks on them. So when it's back there, you're going to have 2 hooks, and they're going to be they're typically called crawler harnesses, because what you're doing is you're going to attach where these hooks go. So here's your front hook, here's your rear hook. This is straightened out, so that's actually the gap between each of those hooks. And what you would do with that is you're going to take your night crawler and you're going to hook the head on right here, and then you're going to hook the body back on there. And I'll show you guys that with the harness crawlers that I have that are pre-rigged. And then I'll kind of show you how I put on the worm. A longer leader is just, in Oklahoma, most walleye fishing equipment is manufactured and tailored and tinkered with in northern states where walleye are native. Their lakes are much different than they are here. They have natural lakes up there, rivers that connect lakes to each other without tail races. So their water typically tends to be, in a lot of cases, shallower overall body of water, because it's not a dammed creek channel. It's a natural body of water. So they also tend to be clear. So the only thing where a longer leader might come in handy is, especially if you're fishing right on the bottom. If you're using just a night crawler with your hook, that's going to sit down, a little bit of the longer of line you have, depending on how fast you're trolling, it's going to bring that line up off the bottom because it's not going to be as heavy as what your weight is. So it's going to be flopping around anywhere from a foot to an inch above the bottom, depending on how fast you're going. So the longer your leader is, if you were to use something like a floating jig head, so this is a floating jig head. If you were to cast this out without any weight or anything, it's just going to sit right on top of the water. So if you ran your leader line with your bottom bouncer to something like this, well, this floats. So if you have an 8-foot leader and you're trolling really slow, well, this thing might end up being 4, 5, 6 feet up off the bottom because it's going to float and it's not going to have that pull. The shorter that your line is, the closer you are to this swivel, the closer to the bottom you are. So it just depends on what you're using. An 8-foot leader, if you're using like a crankbait, if you're trolling a crankbait by bouncing it along the bottom, and it's more of a deeper diver, and you don't want too much tension on it, then you might elect for a longer leader. But really, most case, any length of leader is going to be in association with water clarity. Can the fish see it? And that's, anglers have debated that forever on braided line, fluorocarbon line, monofilament line of, if you're not using the length of your leader for water clarity because you don't want the fish to see it, then the length of it is going to be more in association with if you're using something like a floating weight or a floating jig. How much line do you want to give it behind the weight? And that's going to, depend, or it's going to determine what your actual depth that you're fishing at. And again, you want to be as close to the bottom as you can get. If you can get that thing on the bottom, the better off you are. The only exemptions kind of from that rule would be if you're fishing grass lines, and where we have walleye and saugeye in the state, if you have a big rocky point that goes out, just drops from, 2 feet of water really quickly out into like 15, 16, 18, 20 feet of water. And then you had maybe some flats that worked around those points where you have some grass in them. Those would be the only times where you want to keep it kind of out of that grass and up above it, which is where trolling a crankbait or a floating jig, where you can determine how fast you need to be trolling or how fast you need to be retrieving your cast to keep it right above those grass. Walleye like to attack from, right behind and right below. And so they blend in really well with those rocky bottoms and they'll just sit. So anywhere where there's maybe a little hump or a hole where something comes over the top of them, that's where they're going to come up to go get that. So, but other than if you're fishing around grass where you just want to keep it above the grass line, you want to be right down there on the bottom with everything that you're using. So again, we'll just keep this one rigged up because it's easy. It's already on. But like I said, you could be using rock runners like this, something like a no snag like this. Once you get out, if you're fishing on a lake in the summer, like right now, you're still going to have a lot of fish that are going to be off on offshore humps, holes out there, depending on what the thermocline is of the lake. Those fish just are really more comfortable in 50 to 70 degree water. They're going to prefer even, the colder end, and they're looking for current oxygenated water, somewhere where they can pick off food. So when the wind-blown sides of bodies of water, whether that be the dam, any type of humps or points, wind is going to push, the water across it, and then you're going to get rebound current. And so what happens is those walleye go and they position themselves to where's kind of that bait channel coming. If that water's going up and you have shad and minnows and whatever else, any other food source that's kind of getting sucked along with that current, and it hits and it gets that rebound current, that you're going to see that, especially if you have like big offshore humps where you can kind of tell it gets rockier out there because of water displacement. That's where those fish are going to orient to look for bait. So right now you're going to have a lot of fish that are going to be hanging out in that deeper water. You may get some fish that are coming up in the evenings overnight to feed, especially on a really windy day, low pressure days. We had really good days earlier this week before that cold front came in. We had some really low pressure, overcast skies, some chop on the water. Fishing was pretty good for a couple of days. These last few days, high pressure, cold front comes through, bluebird skies, a little bit rougher, but it's, we're trending back the right direction now for this weekend. And as we get into October, we're really going to start seeing, your saugeye and your walleye really start to pick up in shallower water. So with our bottom bouncing rig, we'll get into the shallow stuff towards the end, but we'll cover all the deep water. So anything that you can't really cast to, that's not really effective from the bank, where you really need to be out in a boat to fish, we'll kind of go over that stuff. So again, if we have got our bottom bouncer like this, so we're going to take everything down to the bottom. The hard baits that I showed, one of my personal favorites is a little ripstop Rapala in purple descent. I really like this color a lot. Had lots of success with these. Some other, here's more of a suspending bait, but something like these. I really like these. This slender profile. Now these, like I said earlier, these are known more for, bass fishing, where they're crankbaits or jerk baits, where you're rip, stop, kind of flutters up, stop, flutters up. But on just a slow, steady troll behind a boat, these things are just, again, I would remove that front treble on all of them, and then either keep your rear treble or replace that with the single point straight shanked hook. And these will just nice and easy, especially suspending jerk baits, because they're not going to have, without having that big lip on them, they're not really going to dive down into the bottom. So you're going to get a nice little flicker that's just going to follow anywhere from being right on the bottom up to a foot or two. So I'd run about a 2-foot leader behind these, but again, you can go out to 4, 6, 8. You'll learn that as, whatever your preference is, but 2 feet's plenty, 2 to 3 feet. So we're going to have our line tied to this. This is going to be dragging along the bottom. I usually only run 2 rods. You could run 4 if you have a really good trolling setup on your boat. But 2 rods off of either side of the boat. You can get really fancy with things. There's planer boards, there's dipsy divers, there's things where you can control with those mechanisms which direction your line is going from the boat. But if you're using those, you probably know what you're doing right now, and you don't need our help catching walleye. But if you're just straight out basic line tied to a bait, just going off both sides of your boat, casting straight out once you get your trolling speed going. I like to go just fast enough that I'm moving. So with these, your trolling speed's probably going to be somewhere between like 1 to 3 miles an hour. 1 mile an hour to 2 miles an hour is kind of that sweet spot that I like to stay in. Keeps you nice down on the bottom. You're not moving too fast. And with suspending slender baits like this, they're really easy to they'll just do this right along the bottom to get hit. And you can also use the kind of the shallower diving baits. Let's see. Something maybe like this that's got a little spinner blade on it. So this would run behind and you're going to get good action on this. But keeping them to where they can bang into the bottom, but they're not so aggressive with like a large bill on them that they're gonna, you don't want to be running when you're already on the bottom. You don't need a 14-foot diving bait. You want to look for crankbaits, jerk baits, any type of minnow, slender minnow hard bait to run off the bottom when you're trolling that is either a suspending or a floating bait, or is a 0 to 5 foot, max diving. So that way, when you're trolling your boat, it's, slow, that lure, if you're going 1 to 2 miles an hour, it's not going to get to 5 feet. So it's going to put you in that perfect zone to be able to troll. And when you're out there trolling, you're looking for things on your graph. On our fishing resources page on our website, if you go to our where to fish pages now, I've included depth lines for any lake that has the data, which is most of the lakes that we have listed. Um, those are great. They're interactive. You can look at them on your phone or on your computer, tablet, and you can zoom in, and the work's already been done. So you can really kind of do your homework on a lake before you even get there, because really what you're looking for is, big drop offs on points. Where can fish go from deep water to shallow water in the quickest amount of time? So really rapid transition areas. We're typically looking for southwest wind days, south wind days. So what side of the lake is getting, what points are jutting out, they're going to get kind of the most amount of that wind that's going to push bait fish up onto it. No matter what direction your dam is facing, walleye and saugeye are always going to be near dams. You're always going to have fish that are on the dam. Just they like those rocky outcroppings. It's really good habitat for them. So dams are always tried and true, and then tail races below bodies of water that have walleye and saugeye in them, you're going to have a decent look at getting into walleye and saugeye when they're generating water. So those are kind of two tried and true places: below a tail, at your tailwater, and then up on your dam are always good places to look. And if you're on a dam, they always kind of look the same. So if you can look at a depth line, or if you're out on the lake with your boat and can use your electronics, looking for just subtle differences in the bottom. Sometimes it can just be a quick turn, oh, we got rocks that are coming down, it's kind of going down gradually. And then just somewhere along there's just maybe a boulder or something. Looking for things like that on a dam. And if you can pinpoint those areas, you're always going to find success in those types of areas. Otherwise, you're looking again for, wind blown points. And by being able to look at the depth lines before you even get to the lake, you can have your homework done and look at, okay, there's a couple of humps that are out here, maybe a saddle or a big hole. And then not that far away is this big point that just comes right up into the shallow water. Those are good places to start. And then, making kind of S turns as you're trolling. If you're not familiar with the lake and you're trying to, find where those channel drops are at, anytime you're trolling, it's always good to just, make just subtle S turns as you're going. It helps you just kind of cover a little bit more water. And then hopefully, walleye and saugeye tend to be a schooling fish. You'll find lots of them in the same areas. So when you find one and you found success, trying to replicate that over and over and over again, trolling is a great way to do that. You're just, you can fish any of the things that we're talking about. You can fish them while trolling, which is great for walleye because we're just trying to be right down by the bottom. So you can troll grubs, you can troll, soft plastic swim bait looking baits, with just a basic jig head. So all of this bottom bouncing with a leader behind it, you can employ any type of tactic that you want behind it for the most part that you would use on a cast and retrieve for walleye. It just allows you to be out in deeper water, cover more water, and hopefully get into fish quicker. The best known body of water for catching walleye in Oklahoma using spoons or anything that flickers light. I haven't got to those ones yet, but your rooster tails, super dupers, things like these. These are all great behind, again, fishing them right behind a bottom bouncing deal. because most of the time, if we're not fishing in that shallow water that's less than 10 feet, where you could cast one of those out, let it fall to the bottom, and then control your depth with your retrieve speed. Getting into walleye and saugeye outside of that, because we want to be down by the bottom, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to fish from the bank with a bottom bouncing rig unless you're just in some, ridiculous drop off where it just, it's fallen off 20 feet in your casting range, where it would just be impossible without a bottom bouncing weight to keep whatever it is you're presenting down near the bottom. If you're just kind of on, your normal shoreline where it's going to be more of a gradual dip out and those fish have sucked up into that shallow water, then you really don't need a bottom bouncing weight. You can throw your crankbait, you can throw your jig head with a grub or a worm, you can throw out a minnow, a live minnow on a jig head, or a live minnow on just a still presentation that's weighted on the bottom, not moving. So the difference between being fishing from the bank or fishing from a fixed location versus trolling, really the only difference is we're just using weight, a bottom bouncing weight to get ourselves to those depth zone. But as far as what's the best lake for walleye, I mean, for just true walleye, probably Canton. Canton Altus Lugert is another good one. We've stocked Saugeye pretty aggressively throughout the state, so you're going to find Saugeye in most bodies of water. The better lakes for Saugeye are going to be the southwestern lakes have a lot of really good Saugeye lakes. So Altus Lugert, Latonka, Tom Steed, Ellsworth, all really good lakes around central Oklahoma. Hefner can be productive for walleye. You get a lot of fish that are sucked down from Canton and work their way through the North Canadian and end up in Hefner and Overholser. Thunderbird's a great Saugeye lake. If you're looking to catch some really, really big Saugeye, Thunderbird has had fish in the lake for several decades now. So if you're looking to catch a really big one, Thunderbird's a good option. Ellsworth is a good option. And Arcadia is getting there now. The fish are we've been stocking them for the last several years, and our Saugeye and Arcadia are finally kind of getting to that catch and keepable size. So Arcadia should be a pretty good Saugeye lake here within the next 5 to 10 years, where it's producing big fish, but a quantity of fish as well. Dams with steep grades, or is it, it really just depends on the lake. If, these fish are going to become acclimated to whatever their environment is when they're put in. So they're really, all fish are just looking for transition areas to feed. So wherever they can get from, deep habitable water to shallow feeding habitable water in the quickest amount of time, those are going to be the areas that are always naturally going to congregate the most fish. Those are just easy feeding lanes for them to get into. So steep grade or a shelf, again, a lot of dams, unless you really know what the underwater topography is, which in some cases might not even have anything to do with the actual, depth gradient. It could be something like laydowns or boulders or any type of structure that might draw in fish. So, but with rebound current that's going to come into dams, especially dams that are on the north side of the water body that are getting hit with southerly winds all day. And then when you're on your dam, you're naturally going to have some current pulling towards the dam, especially if you're releasing water. And again, those fish they're always going to just be looking, if you're facing the water, those fish in most cases on a dam, just because of the spin of the earth. So when water gets sucked underneath, it always kind of naturally shoots to the right in the northern hemisphere. So if you're fishing, fish are going to kind of be looking back at you from your left. If there's a bend in the dam or where it drops, when you can kind of find those corners of the dam where they fall off into deeper water, you're going to get some pretty good current action through there. And those fish are just going to orient in a way where when the water is swooping over, where's that buffet line coming? And they're going to kind of be faced up into it so that they can see it coming. If you're trolling or fishing where there's humps or shelves, they could be oriented in a few different ways. But typically just making, casts, keeping things down near the bottom, you're going to get into them eventually. Um, El Reno, um, I mean, the biggest advice that I can give for any of this, we'll go through all the baits so that people can just kind of see what different types of baits that have success look like. But really, your biggest thing with walleye and saugeye fishing, contact with the bottom in areas of rapid depth change where you have hard bottom. Those are the three components that you're always looking for with walleye and saugeye. Is do I have hard bottom? Do I have an area of changing depth? And can I get my bait or my lure down in, where it's going to be near the bottom? And then from there, there's going to be subtle differences on every body of water. Like I said, if you have nice grass lines that run near those types of areas, those walleye will favor those. They'll sit in those grass and they'll look up for bait fish that are coming across. So those can be, really prime areas, but you're not going to find that on every body of water in the state. So really, walleye saugeye fishing in Oklahoma, there's kind of every body of water has its own little, it seems like you'll find your own little type of tip there from people, locals who fish it all the time, kind of like sand bass, white bass in the state. Seems to be similar. There's lots of good walleye saugeye fishing information out there, but most of the how-to videos that you're going to watch are going to be, again, from northern states or from Canada, and they're fishing bodies of water where the principles that they're teaching are right on. They're what you want to do here. But a lot of times what they're talking about for where you're looking for fish, the makeups of our bodies of water are not the same. So you'll find subtle differences. But hard bottom definition is going to be, rocks, rocky outcrop. Is it shoals that go down? A lot of central and western Oklahoma lakes, you're going to have a lot of clay bottom. But Arcadia, for example, you go to Arcadia on the northeast side of the lake, you're going to find a lot of exposed rocks where you can tell where it's kind of that shoal where it, it almost looks like the rock is, the floor. And then it's got, different from wear and tear from erosion over millions of years. They, kind of jaggedy and, but that's going to be your true hard bottom. If you don't have that, things that where you have maybe some cobble or some gravel, where it's not just a silted in area, which is going to be a lot of the lakes that make up the central part of the state and the western part of the state for sure. As you get over into the eastern part of the state, you get more dramatic drop-offs in those bodies of water. They're narrower channel lines that are in there. So you're going to have rapid depth change. So in eastern lakes, you're probably looking more for shelves than you are for humps. When those fish push up shallow on the eastern side of the state, they could be coming out at 80, 90 feet of water up into 4 feet of water pretty quickly. Lakes like 10 Killer, Robert S. Kerr, Broken Bow, even to some extent, McGee Creek for sure, Pine Creek, all those bodies of water, they have those real dramatic, they're just tight through those canyons. So they have a lot of hard bottom. They're almost all hard bottom all the way down. So then you're looking for, if your entire lake is just rock, then you're looking for things like grassy outcroppings around points. What's more unique? Whereas in the central part of the state, the western part of the state, where it's a lot easier, we're just looking for hard bottom, being, rocks, cobble, gravel, anything like that that's making up most of the substrate in that area, because we're dealing with a lot of sediment fill in from our lakes are on the older side. Most of the lakes in the state were 1920 to 1950. So we're getting towards the latter half of the lifespans of the reservoirs in the state. There's been lots of silting in that's occurred over the years that will cover that hard substrate. But really, you know, fish in a lot of cases tend not to go too far away from their spawning grounds. They like to live their life cycle in a kind of condensed area. Can they get from where they spawn to where they winter to where they summer to where there's always food? And things that always attract food are going to be areas that have more of a hard bottom, not silted in, because for spawning purposes, the eggs are going to be able to be aerated. There's going to be more oxygen. You're just going to, anytime where you have more of that defined, not sediment filled bottoms, you're going to find more fish. It's what's going to hold them year round. So Altus Lugert, for example, you go there, the first part of the lake is the big bowl. And then, the top part of the lake is more just a silted in sand bottom. So when you're fishing for walleye there, because it's such dramatic drop offs, it's basically built into a quartz bowl. You find walleye right up against the bank pretty much year round, but they're in 18 feet of water, just because it's so dramatic. But those are your rocky outcroppings, whereas the rest of the lake is just one big silted in bowl. So those are the types of differences that you're looking for in bottom structure. If your central and your western lakes, you're just looking for rocky points that run out, rocky dam, rocky shelves, maybe an offshore hump, anything like that. Whereas you push over into the eastern half of the lake, Broken Bow has walleye in it. They have lots of offshore humps and islands. There's a lot of really cool topography to the bottom of that lake, and it's mostly cobble bottom, being that clear water eastern streams that are fed from the Washita and the Ozark ranges. They're going to be cleaner spring fed water. So your bottom substrate is going to be pretty similar across the entire lake. So then you're looking for more unique features. Is there a big long shelf? Is there a defined hump next to a hole? Is there a big grass line that runs along that combination of factors that you can pull in? Around Durant that have walleye and Saugeye, I would imagine that some of those lakes are going to have Saugeye in them for sure. Like I said, we've pretty aggressively stocked Saugeye across the state. You can go to our website and look at, on our fishing, we have reports of where Saugeye are stocked each year and walleye, what lakes that they typically go into. We tend to stock more Saugeye now than we do walleye, because we produce Saugeye annually, whereas walleye, we might get those from another state. Pretty much now our walleye in the state are just used for our brood stock for our Saugeye. So, but our northwestern, our Byron fish hatchery up in the northwestern part of the state, you can go to our website and look up the number for Byron hatchery, or just Google Byron State Fish Hatchery, and you can give them a call, and they produce all of our Saugeye, and they're the ones who round up the walleye and sauger to produce our Saugeye. They can give you very detailed information on where fish have been put around the state, how recently, how much. They're going to kind of be your wealth of knowledge for where the fish are. But at this point in time, Saugeye are in most of the lakes of the state, especially any of the medium to large size reservoirs, just because they're an easy fish to stock if we're not worried about messing up the food chain in any way with too many predators, because we don't have walleye naturally. So you're not as worried about you putting a species that's not native into a body of water that's going to conflict with a native species that is similar. You see that with like smallmouth bass in the northeastern part of the state. And then you'll see that for some of your brood stock for sauger or anything like that. Most hybrids that are produced, whether they be hybrid sunfish, hybrid striped bass, Saugeye, in in almost all cases, those fish are sterile, but that's not 100%. So um, with Saugeye, we're not worried about native populations as much outside of our sauger base. So you're going to find Saugeye in most parts of the western side of the state, and then anything south of the Arkansas River where you don't have inflow into the Arkansas, you're going to find Saugeye. Um, let's talk about some live bait presentations. We'll start with the harness crawlers. These are great. You can make these your own. You can order all of the pieces for really, really cheap to have a bunch of them, or you can just buy the prepackaged ones that are like $3 or $4 for a 2-pack. But it's something that comes like this. We're attached to our swivel already. So these are great for, I love mixing and matching these with the guts from Lindy rigs. These slide on. This one's actually already hooked up to one. Let me grab another one. So these ones, they have just this little tiny swivel on it. So you could attach that to a snap swivel in your bottom bouncing weight. But if you have a lot of walleye and Saugeye gear that you kind of intermixed with, I love taking just the guts, 2 pieces from the Lindy rig, the swivel and the weight. And then with these, let's see, I wound that one up. So again, with these, you just want to go slow when you take these apart. They have, you're going to have 2 hooks on these, and that back trailer hook is just barely held on. So it's probably wrapped around the line once. So you want to get to that swivel after you just do 1 loop off with that trailer hook, and then it should unwind fairly seamlessly. Every now and then you get one that it just gets wrapped up funny. So when you go to take it apart, you end up with a big kind of knot. So just watching both ends, make sure that nothing is stuck in there, or you'll end up with a big knot trying to pull these apart. So once you get it loose like that, it's just kind of slowly let it unwind. Maybe even put your finger in there in the middle of it to make sure that you don't get knotted up. But so again, just like our Lindy rig, we got a little bit bigger, a little bit longer leader than the Lindy rig by about maybe a half a foot. So this one's closer to 3 feet than it is to 2. But this is what the end of it looks like. This little piece right here is floating. So this is called a floating harness crawler. And what you do is you would take your cup of worms, your night crawler. I don't fish a lot with minnows. There's people who fish exclusively for walleyes with minnows, whether they be vertically jigging with a jig head or using some type of bottom bouncing trolling technique where they're using minnows instead of a worm. I use a night crawler or red worms throughout the state. I've caught enough fish doing it that I haven't really given a lot of effort to minnows, but there's some people who will favor minnows. There's some lakes where fish might target minnows more so at certain times of year. I've just never had problems with night crawlers. So I keep it simple. This is kind of my go-to bottom trolling rig if I'm when I'm using worms, if I'm not using a crankbait or some type of artificial with a jig head. So you would just string your worm on just like that. Like I said, these are artificial, so not much of a problem. Depending on how fresh your night crawlers are, you'll notice that if they're, fresh out of the fridge, have never been opened, they're nice and firm. So you're probably going to get away with just being able to attach one end once through like that. I almost always just give it 1 wrap just to make sure that I'm held on there on the top. And then I'll do the same with the back of it, where you just you'll pull the worm straight, and you'll pull the hook straight, make sure that you don't get a lot of the worm kind of wound up before you put the trailer hook in. And you could leave it just like that. But again, I always just give it just one wrap just to make sure that I'm held on there. So when I go to cast that back out behind me, out behind the boat when I'm trolling, it goes straight out. I don't have to worry about the worm flinging off or anything. And you would just attach this. So just like you would with the loop on the prepackaged hooks, same thing with these. These will slide right onto these little Lindy rig swivels. But again, if you wanted to make your own, it's fine. Snap swivel will work perfectly. And then you just pull that down. And then it'll hold right there. And this will cast out straight behind the boat. This will be dragging down along the bottom. This will be out a couple feet behind it with the float on it. So make sure that it doesn't get quite on the bottom, but it's going to be really close. And just like a rooster tail or any type of spinning blade, this is going to rotate the entire time. So this is going to be causing flicker and flash. This gives you a little extra flash. And then you're going to have your bait back here. And that'll troll along. I tend to troll with spinning reels. I can keep my drag set really good. You can troll with casting rods. Just make sure your drag is set really well. I've just always found that my spinning reels, I can keep just a better perfect drag on it than I ever have with like bait casting reels or casting reels. So I troll exclusively with spinning equipment. So when that's going back behind me, they either get it or they don't. So I'll be driving the boat along, 2 rods off, and all I'm doing is I'm watching the fish finder, looking off at what everybody else is doing on the lake, and I'm just listening. And the second that you hit a fish, you'll hear that zzz, and then you can either keep the boat going if you have multiple people on the boat, and I'm trolling at such a slow speed that typically I'll just keep going while whoever's on the boat with me, or even myself, if it's not too windy and I can keep the boat straight, I'll just reel them up and keep the other one going. A lot of times you're trolling 2 rods, you find a school of fish. I've had them where even with these, even if they're not flickering, if I stop the boat to reel in a fish, you still have a night crawler that's sitting down on the bottom. Well, this may not be flashing anymore, but this is sitting here. Sometimes you'll pick up fish while that rod's just sitting still. Other times you can reel that fish in and the other rod will go because you've gone through a school of fish. But these are my absolute favorite, just these floating harness crawlers. They're super simple, super easy, great way to cover a lot of water. I have found that on bodies of water that have lots of drum in them, if you're not on top of walleye, you will find tons of drum with those harness crawlers, and they're fun too. I mean, you plug into an 8 to anything over 8 pounds on a drum, they give you a pretty good tug, especially with 100 yards of line out behind you. So that's just one thing to keep in mind is these do have the tendency to find just a lot of drum, but super simple, effective way to fish from the bottom and troll behind you. If I was to, we've done the crankbaits, you could use, so instead, if you had your leader line attached to your bottom bouncer, you could have a floating jig like this, and you might attach it to some type of paddle tail swim bait that you can fix up on there. Some good ones that I like are these Yum finesse worms, cotton candy. I stick a lot with purples, pinks, bright oranges, but things like this, where you're going to have kind of more of a traditional, what you would look for bass with, or temperate bass, more of that chartreuse and blueback. You're going to have success with those. But most of what I'm using is something that's more in just purple, pink colors. Here's some, rage tail swimmers. Any of these are going to work on, a floating jig setup. You can use you could use just a regular jig. These are called fireball jig heads. Most of the time with walleye, especially little short ones like this, these are great for attaching a live minnow to. So if you can mark fish on your electronics, or if you're out on a dock or a pier and you can fish vertically, all of these, they come with this little back eye on them. So you tie your main line just like you would to your front eye. And then with a minnow, let's say that this little fluke right here was my live minnow. However you like to do your minnows, I go through right through the mouth. So I'll open the mouth up of a minnow. I'll go right through the roof between the nose holes. So I don't go through the brain. I don't get it. The fish stays alive. It allows the bottom lip to stay open so they can breathe. If you run it through their bottom jaw and their top jaw, they're not going to be able to have oxygen go over their gills. So they'll die faster. So if this was my minnow, you would take it and however you like to rig it, and you go up on, and you'd be like this. So your minnow would be hanging freely like this. Now you could jig it just like this, and you could have your minnow and just straight up off the bottom, just lifting from 3 o'clock to 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock to 12 o'clock, and just do that. But what will really help you not miss too many bites or have your bait stolen is attaching a stinger hook. So this back eye right here, again, in Oklahoma, you're not going to find a lot of it just because we don't have a lot of specialty walleye equipment. You'll find very basic models of everything at a Bass Pro or a Cabela's. But if you're really into Saugeye walleye fishing and you like that type of equipment, you want to learn more, Northland Fishing Tackle, just Northland Fishing Tackle. They're based out of Minnesota. They have great how-to videos on their website, but they're a great place, like a retailer, to order from. And then there's some other ones that are based out, Lindy Rig. You can find tackle through them, but they're going to have all of a different array of equipment for walleye and Saugeye that you're just not going to find at a retailer in store in Oklahoma. You're going to be able to put together a lot of these pieces. So everything I've shown you today, I have physically purchased in the state of Oklahoma. So obviously you can get yourself a good bit of tackle. But if you really get into it and you're just looking for something different, Northland Fishing Tackle is a great place to look. And they sell like stinger hook attachments where you maybe have a swivel right here. But anyways, if you wanted to attach a stinger hook, all we're doing is we're going to connect a treble hook to the back of your minnow from your hook. So in the case that the fish comes up and gets it, but doesn't get to your jig head hook, you have a better chance of success without actually like ripping the hook off. So however you want to tie your line on, you would do this before you had your minnow on. So you'd get your stinger hook ready. Again, anytime that there's an eye hole big enough, I'm going to use a Palomar knot. It's just quick and easy. So tie this on. We haven't really talked a lot about the line, like pound test of what you'd use. So walleye and Saugeye have teeth, canine-like teeth. They are very similar to that of like a puppy or a kitten. They're about the same size. They're definitely the same sharpness. And they can cut line. They can fray line. It doesn't happen as often as you think it would, like when people go fishing for like barracuda, things that can really take your line off. But they can get it. And just where you're fishing for them, you're fishing near the bottom. Fluorocarbon can be a gamble. Fluorocarbon is very easy to fray and break, but it's super sensitive. You can feel everything. I have tried an array of different types of setup. For most fishing, I like braided line with a fluorocarbon leader. But I've lost fish doing that. Whether it be the braided line, if I tie braid directly onto my swivel where my weight is at, and then have my fluorocarbon leader coming off of the swivel to whatever bait presentation I'm using. I like anywhere from 7 to 10 pound fluoro, I've frayed off fish. So really kind of a good overall line for trolling or for casting. 14-pound mono is pretty good. If you're looking for just kind of a standard all around, here I can use this for a lot of different fish. I don't have to worry about, having a walleye or Saugeye specific rod. 14-pound mono is going to give you everything you need for trolling, dead sticking, jigging, anything like that. And you're going to have the least likely chances of getting your line cut, frayed. So if you're looking for a line, 14-pound mono is a really good one for walleye. Not too heavy. So we have our line hooked up here. We have our treble. I kind of shortcut myself on my tag end, so we'll just do a little improved clinch here. I'll see if I answer any. Preferred not to tie when fishing. I'm always going to use a Palomar knot if I can. With braided line, that's really kind of one of your only options, and it's a good tight. You're not going to snap braid. Even 10-pound braid it really holds up better than 10-pound mono or fluoro does, as far as popping knots or anything like that. But an improved clinch I like an improved clinch for if I'm tying on like a really expensive crankbait or something that I really don't want to lose if I'm just hooked from my main line to my eyelet of whatever I'm using, then I'm probably going to go with an improved clinch. I'm going to twist it 6-7 times. And I'm going to make sure that when I go and I tighten it, that it looks, real good, where that tag end is coming down off the bottom straight out and everything is cinched on there. That's going to be a really strong knot that's not going to fail me. But for the most part, Palomars very rarely break on you unless you're just using like super light line. If you're using 4-pound test, 6-pound test, maybe even 8-pound test of fluoro or monofilament, and you tie a Palomar knot, you might snap it more often than you would an improved clinch. But like I said, unless I'm just using a bait that I really don't want to lose, I'm almost always going to tie on a Palomar. So, all right. So let's pretend this is our live minnow. We've hooked him up through his nose and he's like this. So our stinger hook, this is a little bit long. That's why, like I said, that companies that sell them, where some of them that you can buy the jig head and the hook's already attached. So this is just a little long. It's not going to make that much of a difference. You can have some excess line, but all you're going to do is you're just going to take that treble hook and you're just going to go right through the back of that. So it's just hanging off like that. So you find you've marked fish, they're down on the bottom, and you're just vertically jigging right above them. It's just going to look like that. So that fish, that walleye or Saugeye comes along and it goes and grabs, but it doesn't inhale it. I've found, especially from doing a lot of still fishing, where I'm just fishing off the bottom with like a night crawler, and I'm just tight lined and I'm either in a rod holder or holding on. I found that walleye tend to peck. I don't know if it's just the way their mouths are shaped when they're coming up and they grab the back of that worm and it just takes them a couple of chomps to suck it in. Whereas like, a bass comes up and it's just a vacuum. It just sucks it right in. So same thing with like a minnow. That walleye might come up behind it and grab half of it. Well, they got those sharp teeth on them. And if there's any tension with the line, because a lot of times you jig it straight up, they hit it when it's falling back down. So you don't actually feel the bite. The second that there's tension from your main line to that jig head and the fish has it right here, it's going to either bite your minnow in half, rip all of it off. So just a little stinger hook like that. That's any jig head that you see that comes with these back eyes. That's what it's for. It's just attaching a little stinger hook. So that'll help you if you want to use live minnows. And again, if you're just casting straight out and just really slow retrieve, you can use a stinger hook as well, because you're just fishing that minnow down along the bottom, and that'll help you hook up a few extra fish without losing too many minnows. So let's see here. Kind of covered, again, this is meant to be conversational. If there's something in trolling, everything I've covered so far has pretty much been for deep water boat fishing. So now I'm going to switch it over to fishing from the shore and fishing in shallow water. We're going to be using all these same types of baits, but how we fish them is just going to be a little bit different because most of the presentations that we're now going to go over involve you straight from your main line. So your main line is hooked up to whatever it is that you're using. You don't have a swivel on. You don't have a leader line. You're connected directly to your bait or lure. So I'll just go through the way that we did the deep water and the trolling. And we'll go with the hard baits. So again, like I said, taking off, jerk baits especially. When fish get up in real shallow water, which is going to be your dusk hours, your dawn hours, around the full moon, especially in October, maybe even November if the water temps haven't gotten too cold yet. And then again, once we get back into February, March, April, the full moon's around that. And then when they're attempting to spawn, they're going to push up into really, really shallow water. So when you're in less than 6 feet of water, you can fish jerk baits just like you would for bass, where crank, pause, maybe a rod pop, let it flutter, crank, maybe a pop of the rod tip. You can do it all with the reel. Some people like to pop with the rod tip instead of the reel. You can do it either way. With bait casting equipment, you can get away with a little bit more on popping the rod without creating a bird's nest. If you're fishing jerk baits with an open face spinning reel, you probably want to do it with the reel. So pointing your rod tip straight at that bait or just a little bit off and giving it 1 or 2 really hard reel cranks and then allowing it to pause and flutter. That way you're not picking up your slack. If you were to fish with your rod tip with an open face spinning reel with jerk baits and you create the jerk motion with the rod tip and then pick up the slack, more than likely you're going to reel twists in. So you're better off doing it with the reel handle. Now with the bait caster, especially if you're using like braided line connected to a fluoro leader or a monofilament leader, then you can kind of snap that rod tip without worrying about putting frays when you're reeling up the slack. So that's really the only thing with these is you can fish them more like a crank or like a jerk bait, using them the way that they were kind of intended to when those fish are in super shallow water. Or you can just slow roll them along. If you can get them down towards the bottom, just real slow, let them kind of sit up like this and they'll just flicker along. And same way with kind of our deeper diving ones. And like I said, you can use shallow diving ones, ones that aren't gonna, that are meant for 1 to 4 feet, 1 to 5 feet. The difference with those is that in order to get it to that 5 feet, you're going to have to be reeling it at that maximum speed to get it to dive to that depth. I am a huge proponent of slowing down. Any presentation you can use, unless it is just like striped bass taken off after, rattle traps or umbrella rigs, I almost find no reason to fish fast. The slower I can retrieve anything, even power baits like crankbaits and plugs and anything like that, the slower you can go, I've always found that I catch more fish. So I elect for the deeper diving ones when I'm in shallow water, only for the fact that I'm just slowing down my retrieve speed to compensate for the depth. So if I'm reeling this at, very slow retrieve speed and its maximum depth is 11 feet, I know that I'm putting this perfectly at 5 feet, 5 or 6 feet. And that's, again, why I take off these front trebles. And then in most cases, I don't keep the back treble on. I'll replace it with that before I use a bait. And these you can get like eagle claw. So just these O'Shaughnessy hooks, 2/0 are good. I think 3/0 are a little big, but you probably get away with it. Again, I think 1/0s are a little small, probably get away with it. I like 2/0s. They seem to fit the baits perfectly. Just attach them to that rear treble hook side up, just like that, and then you can just bang these into the bottom. So that way you can pick up your retrieve speed a little bit more, and once you feel contact with the bottom, just enough to where every reel crank, you're feeling that bill just kind of catch the bottom. And what that simulates is a bait fish feeding down on the bottom, moving across, eating insect larvae, anything like that. So it's just cranking across the bottom like that, but you don't have any fear of the bottom of the lure finding a piece of trash, old fishing line, a misplaced twig that happens to be stuck down, anything that can hold up, a $5 to $20 bait is not good. So you're not going to catch fish with just the single. You might miss a strike here and there, but overall, you're going to catch just as many fish, and you're going to lose 75% less baits than you would if you leave those treble hooks on. Look at a couple of questions. Okay. So that's what I like with the crankbaits. But again, it's completely up to your preference, what you're comfortable with. If you want to run a 4 to 6 foot diving crankbait and you want to, crank it in hard and it's moving a little bit faster, but you're finding success, great. All the tips and tricks I'm giving is just to try to put you on as many fish as possible every time you go fishing. But every angler is going to find their own little niche of what they like to use, how they like to use it, when they like to use it, where they like to use it. So everything I've shown today, one of these things you're going to find success with, and that will ultimately end up what you use consistently. Like I said, if I'm out trolling, this is my go-to with the night crawler. Now this color, not so much, but the walleye are native to northern water, so they're used to seeing what a perch actually is, a yellow perch. So any baits that you see that are labeled, they're mostly labeled as fire tiger, but they're this color. These types of patterns where you have the green back, orange bottom, yellow stripe through with the tiger stripes through them, that's mimicking yellow perch. So it's still ingrained in these fish's DNA, even though they haven't actually seen a yellow perch in real life in their life, but that's just a pattern that is always consistent. So things like this is just kind of like a little rooster tail spinner bait, but it gives you a big long hook on the end so that you can hook up a grub. These are also good to troll or just straight cast and retrieve when they're up in the shallows. I really like these so the blades, kind of a orange and yellow for the harness crawlers. That's one of the ones that I really like. And then just this kind of white with a little bit of orange on it. It's a little bit hard to see on the webcam, but that's a lot more orange than what it looks like. But then you're going to have, things like this gold flicker that are more of that kind of perch pattern, something that's more like a bumblebee pattern, but got those stripes on it. And then there's also ones that aren't floaters. They have the little balls on them instead of a floating. So these are going to ride a little bit closer to the bottom. But these have that perch pattern on them as well. So, but that's pretty much what I use if I'm out on a boat for sure, is I'm going to troll those harness crawlers. And then I might troll one of the long slender, usually a jerk bait. But if I'm out on a boat, something like one of these will maybe accompany the other trolling rod if I'm running just the two. So that's what I stick to. But any of these other deals, these are all tried and true effective methods that have caught fish. So you'll find what you really like to do, where you like to do it at. And then, because that's the biggest thing with fishing, it's just finding confidence. You can watch any how-to video, you can watch any course, you can talk about fishing, read about fishing, until you're blue in the face. But until you physically are actually doing it, having success doing it, and then being able to replicate it, that's the point that, you know, we want to help you get to, is because once you have that and you have confidence in that bait, you can take it wherever you go, you know how to fish it, and you can replicate success. So everything we're showing here, hopefully just one or two of the things sticks with you and you find success with it, and you can continue on. So what most people, or what is going to be really effective, that's super easy, the least complicated way when we're in shallow water targeting fish, is just a simple jig head, just a regular old fashioned, either just a plain jig head, just like this, something that you would use for your grubs, anything for crappie fishing, something like this. You might use a Roadrunner head, so something that's got the blade attached to it for a little extra flicker. Then there's kind of more specialty jig heads that are like this, that have like a it's almost like a chatterbait, but it's a willow blade, so it gives off more a pulsing action. You could go with just an actual non-skirted chatterbait bladed jig head like that and attach a soft plastic to it. And then what I actually like to use, that I'm learning, I'm getting better at it, but it's been a learning curve, is using Ned head rigs, which are just instead of it being a cylindrical head, it's a flat head. It almost looks like a square. And so when this falls to the bottom, it's eventually going to fall over. That current and water is going to give it a little bit of buoyancy, but it's going to fall. Whereas these Ned heads, they're going to stand straight up. So attaching a bait like this, or a trick worm, or a little grub on a Ned, you can pause it more often, because what happens is you drag it across the bottom, but then when you go and stop, it stands up. And again, that's just simulating that bait fish. So something like this on a stand-up jig head, it doesn't have to be a Ned head. You're going to see it advertised as a Ned head for bait companies like Z-Man. Other brands are going to have it called something else. A lot of them use Ned, but you might see it labeled as something else. But basically, it's a stand-up jig head, something that when it rests, it's going to stand up. So this tail is just going to pulse a little bit, and then I can either just slowly retrieve it or kind of hop and pop it. But the difference being with those Ned heads is you can pause a lot longer because it'll stay up. Whereas if you're using more of a traditional ball jig head, it is eventually going to fall over. So you're not going to get as long of a pause. But this is very, very basic. Anything, we'll go through some of these soft plastics, but little curly tail, ribbed, if you can fish anything with ribs on it, you just get a extra pulse, stimulating those lateral lines. So just something like this. These come in all sorts of colors. These are kind of the colors that I favor. But let's see, we got what are these even labeled as? Chartreuse pepper bubblegum is what that is. This is just straight chartreuse. Then we have this is called Sunrise, but this is an orange and a yellow. And then we have light blue pink. And then, so these are all great to hook up to a jig head and just either slow retrieve, let it bounce along the bottom. In super shallow water, especially if it's calm, an 1/8 ounce is going to be plenty of weight. I always lean a little bit heavier, a quarter ounce, 3/8, just so I can feel the bottom. Make sure that an eighth of an ounce is starting to get into that range where it's real difficult to feel the, you're gonna. It's just light enough that every time you pick it up off the bottom and you have current and buoyancy, that it takes a little bit longer. With the quarter ounce, every time I'm either slowly retrieving it or popping it and pausing it, I can feel that contact with the bottom. Um, but then, you can use grubs. These are just chartreuse with pink tails, just straight chartreuse, white, clear kind of ghost minnows with sparkles in them, purples, pinks. Um, here's some purple and kind of white bellies, but they all just have just a little bit of a curly tail on them, or they could have paddle tails. They could have tails like these that are meant to kind of pulse vertically. See if I have any with actual. These would be more of like a paddle tail, like a true paddle tail, like a swimmer. So, but this is, I really like this color pattern a lot. This is my favorite bait, for sure, for a soft plastic. This is a Z-Man trick shot, and this is in, I think it's called Twilight, maybe is the color, but these are little rage swimmers. So this is a Strike King, little ribbed body on it, just like this one kind of has ribs, but this one is meant for more of a swimming motion where the paddle tail is out so that horizontally it's kicking, where this one is meant for more of a drop shot or a standing still presentation where the water current is going to kind of flap that tail up, where this is meant to go side to side. So anything like this, curly tails, these pre-MEPS makes these nice little kind of rooster tail spinners that come with the grubs on them, and then it shows you on the back of the packaging how to rig them. These are great too. You can mix and match, different soft plastics with spinner baits like this. These are all quarter ounce, so real good at, you can cast them out, let them fall down to the bottom. Anything that's got a blade on it, whether it be a road runner or a offset spinner, a rooster tail spinner, an inline spinner, letting it fall down to the bottom, great. But when you start to reel, always, even if you're just letting it hit the water and you're starting to reel, anything that's got an inline spinner on it, give it a fake hook set. So just a quick little sweeping action as you engage the reel to go, and that's going to get that blade spinning. Sometimes the way that they fall, current, wind, maybe just the position of the bait in relation to where the line is to the end of your rod tip, just might not be right, and you'll start reeling. You should feel that really good flutter on the tip of your rod. So if you're using baits that like inline spinners, you're going to want to probably, medium action rod at the heaviest. You might even elect for a medium light action rod. Just depending, medium light means different things to different rod manufacturers and sizes, but like a really good bass rod that's a medium light action, those are great for inline spinners. The soft rod tip allows for a little bit of bend, giving you enough tension that when you get that blade spinning, it keeps it spinning. If you're using a heavier rod, heavier line, any inline spinner is great with like 6 to 8 pound test on just a medium to medium light action rod that's going to have a soft enough tip above that second, your second to last eye guide. If that can bend just a little bit, that's going to really help with keeping that blade spinning. Let's see. Where's your favorite place to fish? Favorite place to fish. I'm a big streams guy. I really, my bread and butter is trout and smallmouth on rivers and creeks. So that's kind of my go-to if I was to pick a favorite place to fish. If I'm just talking for walleye and saugeye, there's a lot of really good places in the state. It's really hard to beat the tailwaters below Canton and Ellsworth at the right times of year when they're pumping water. You can catch some really, really big fish doing that. Um, my home lake is Hefner, Arcadia. Spend more time at Hefner than I do at Arcadia. I've made a concerted effort this fall to get out to Arcadia more often, just because we're, like I said earlier in this, it's finally getting to the point where the Saugeye that we've put in there are of catchable size and of keepable size. So I'll probably put some more effort into Arcadia, but those are kind of my home lakes based out of central Oklahoma. Um, but yeah, for walleye and saugeye, you really can't beat the southwestern part of the state overall. They're all great fisheries. Latonka, Tom Steed, Ellsworth, Fort Cobb, all great lakes. All have quality fish and just quantity of fish. The Northwest, Canton's a good lake, and then Foss is, Foss you got to figure out. Foss is a little bit tougher of a fishery, but it's got a good population of fish in it. Same thing with central part of the state. Hefner tends to be more consistent, but Arcadia has some just, lunker fish in it. And certainly here in the next 5 to 10 years, we expect to have some really quality size saugeye in there. So, and then Thunderbird. Lake Thunderbird is a great saugeye lake. You want to just go reel until your arm's sore in the spring and the fall there. All those shallow coves, especially on the southern end of the lake, they got all those big points that drop out into deep water. Fish move up into there pretty consistently. So you can really do some damage on Thunderbird for saugeye. But yeah, so we went through the jig heads, and like I said, you can run anything that you want with them. It's just whatever you're comfortable with. Any types of these are kind of hard to see in the packaging with the light glare, but things like this, you can hook these up to just a jig head or a harness crawler. But if you put these, you could do the same thing that you do with the minnow if you wanted to fish with an artificial, and just plug this on here like you would any type of soft plastic onto a jig head, just enough to work it up. Now these ones, I try to find jig heads that have bait holding clips on them. Z-Man products, they make some pretty cool ones that have just a little piece of metal on them that hold down where they don't have more of the kind of standard collar on them like this. This one has more of a big collar, but what that does is it punches a pretty big hole, obviously, into the center of your soft plastic. I'm not a huge fan of that. I'd like for it to be more of, let's see, these ones. So like this, these little willow ones, these have them. So you can see the difference where there's just that little bait holding clip right there, but there's really not the big collared neck on it like there is on something like that. This one is more of just pretty much the same size as the hook shank. It's a little bit bigger, but not by much. And a lot of their jig heads that the Z-Man brand makes, they just have that clip. This one doesn't have a clip on it, but it'll hold on there pretty good. So you would just take something like that, and then again, you just throw your stinger hook midway through the back of these so you have enough action on the back end, and then you just slowly just across the bottom, and this back end is going to pulse in that current. You can just put a straight grub on like a road runner head, something like this, and little chartreuse grub. I always go where the tail spins up. That's the side I want the hook point coming out of. Most of these they have, because they're molded, you can actually see the line that runs down them where the mold was at, and you just want to pull your hook point out right on that mold line. And then just something like that. And you just straight retrieve that along. Again, like I said, I'm partial to purples purple, maybe with a little bit of pink in it. If I'm just going to run a grub along the dam during that kind of pre-spawn season where they really stack up and are aggressive in real shallow water, where you're not really even maintaining contact with the bottom anymore because you're only in 4 feet of water. So those fish are pretty much just lined up, and you can see it a lot if you go to a lake at dark where you're in that shallow water. If you have a mag light, hit the water. Walleyes, they have kind of that translucent eye where it glows, so you can hit the top of the water, and at times of the year when you can see those fish in their thick as thieves, just a quick spotlight through and you're like, okay, there's tons of fish in here. And if you can see the eyes, they're obviously not too far below the surface, especially in the central and most of the western part of the state where the water is a little bit turbid. It's not going to be crystal clear. So that gives you a good indication of where fish are at pretty fast. That happens at the Canton Dam in the spring, but it's going to happen at most places. You can give a quick little shine of the water and see those eyes looking back at you. And that's where just quick retrieves with grubs and keeping them off the bottom. And then our rooster tails. So this is kind of a bigger one. This is a Cabela's brand. This is that perch pattern, but pretty standard. You just hook up your main line, let it fall down to the bottom, give the rod tip a quick little hook set action up to get this blade spinning around, and then just straight retrieve those, and you'll find success with those. So I usually keep one in kind of a perch color and then another one in this just pretty standard black, red, and gold. This is a good one. This does a pretty good job of mimicking a leech, where for live bait, we've mentioned night crawlers. That's pretty much what I use. I don't stray very far from that. I don't use minnows very often. You can have success with them. Leeches are another staple of walleye fishing. So something that's got a little bit of black and that red, that things like this, if you're not actually using a live leech. But again, if you're fishing from the bank, it's great to use just this lindy rig setup where you can just tight line one hook with a minnow on it, with a night crawler on it, or with a leech on it. And if you make your own, if you're using, you're tying your own hook on, as opposed to a prepackaged, snelled, looped hook and line. If you're making your own, you might go ahead and tie on like a double snell. So you have two hooks for your night crawler, so that it ends up, on two hooks like this, as opposed to just one. Because like I said, they'll peck at it. And every now and then, if you're not patient enough to really wait to where you have that really tight tension where, okay, it's in the fish's mouth and it's beginning to pull that line away, as opposed to just the dink, dink, dink on the top of the rod tip. Having two hooks on there, it's just, again, it's like having the stinger hook on. It doesn't mean that you're going to catch more fish, but it's probably going to eliminate maybe that one or two fish that got away just because it bit off the back half of the bait. But just the single hook that they come with this, you just have that single bait holder. A leech fits on great onto that little minnow, or a red worm or a night crawler. But again, you fish like that, you have a tendency to catch more of your non-target species, just because you're leaving bait sitting alone on the bottom. But really effective, easy way to catch a lot of fish. Do we have anything? And you can always use something like this, these prepackaged ones that are already snelled for you. So that's, as you accrue walleye and saugeye equipment, you'll notice that a lot of these, you can kind of mix and match the guts of different prepackaged baits to suit your needs as you learn where fish are at on a certain body of water and how you want to target them. Let's see, I got one. These are kind of one last deal here, outside of like these MEPs that I had showed where they're prepackaged in. You'll see a lot of walleye heads that take one of these out of the package, but they're kind of like a Roadrunner head, but you notice that they don't have any type of bait holding. So again, you could throw a piece of artificial off of this. You could put a night crawler on the back of it. But a lot of walleye fishing, especially from up north, when they get on those fish, is they like to vertically jig them. So they go and they park their boats out right above a big hump or a shelf where they know all those fish are at, and they'll take something that, this just gives it a little bit of extra flash. But all they're doing with things like these are, they're just putting their minnow on, and they let that minnow fall straight down 3 o'clock to noon, 3 o'clock to noon, 3 o'clock to noon, and you just vertically jig right off the bottom. With vertical jigging, you want to be really fast on the hook set. It's not like what I was describing with tight lining a night crawler. With just because of the fluttering action of going up and down, a lot of times bites happen in that fall. And so you don't have tension on your line. So you really got to pay attention to, did my line do anything weird in between, 12 o'clock and 3? Whereas if you can jig it straight up and it falls right back down to the bottom and you know what that looks like and feels like, that's when you'll start noticing if a fish grabbed it before it hit the bottom. But you'll see jig heads that look like this. They'll have a little bit of that flash on the back. You can even, like on these, you could put a stinger line from there and tie it on. You could even probably tie one on through the front hole. But this is just like another Roadrunner. This is a much heavier, bigger head than your Roadrunner. So if you were to drag this along the bottom, or just off the bottom, you can work it like a Roadrunner. Otherwise, it's just for that flicker, for when it gets jigged straight up, and as it falls down, you just kind of get that flash of a dying fish, or of an actively feeding fish that's moving up and down. And then I think I showed for trolling or in really shallow water, if you wanted to try a super duper, which is really light, it's not going to, even like a 1/6 ounce of a rooster tail, you're going to be able to get that to fall down to 8 feet of water fairly quickly by letting it sink. This, not so much. So if you wanted to try like a super duper, you may put on like 1 or 2 pieces of split shot about a foot in front of where you tie your main line onto this, and allow that to sink down to the bottom, and then just a really slow roll to let your split shot kind of be your bottom bouncer, while that super duper just stays just a little bit up off the bottom with that really slow flash and kick. But not nearly as utilized, especially for walleye and saugeye. But it's a great bait profile, really nice and slender. This kind of open wobble, just like with the spoon. I didn't really show any spoons, but you could cast and retrieve a spoon or troll a spoon, just with like anything else that we talked about. But this is what your super duper. It's got that open area, so when it's going through the water, it just creates that wobble. But super dupers can come in very handy with finicky fish. This just provides a great profile in something that isn't really thrown. Most people use super dupers in a smaller size than this for trout. So there's a good chance that most bodies of water of the state, this profile and this type of signature that it's giving off in the water is much different than your standard jig head and a grub. That's why utilizing baits that have ribs through them that are just going to give off a little bit of extra action, or maybe it takes just putting a blade on to get a little bit of extra action, especially on heavily pressured bodies of water. But with that's pretty much all I got for this. So I'll answer questions if you guys have any to throw in here. Otherwise, we appreciate you being on. Hope you learned something new, or you learned something helpful that's going to help you out on fishing. The email that you receive for the link has my contact information. Feel free to call, text, email, any fishing questions that you have. I'll answer them for you. Or if you have questions about lakes or certain types of stockings, I can put you in contact with the right people to get those questions answered. Any tips for setting the hook, timing, etc. with walleyes and saugeye? Most of the time it's going to be a pretty good thump. Cast and retrieve or trolling, they're not really going to mess around with it. Really, the only The only tips for types of fishing for where the hook set isn't going to be just a pretty, standard thump hook set is going to be if you're fishing still off the bottom, especially with the night crawler and one hook where they can peck down on it. You just have to be patient. Um, we have a trout. We're doing this same deal next month for trout. That'll be a big topic on that with fishing with power bait is let the fish take it. You have a tendency of you get that dink and dink and dink and dink and dink, and you're trying to decide, is it time to set it or am I going to pull it out? I try to wait for steady tension. Unless I just think that it's a bluegill or it's not a species that's going to really be able to inhale that hook. A lot of times I'm waiting for just the line to start moving. They're going to peck their way down until they get attached to one of those hooks. And a lot of times what happens is because you're fishing with a weight and just a 2-foot leader, the more that they hit at it, the more likely they are to bounce the rod tip with the weight where it's going to set the hook for you. Now, not so good that you need to rely on that. You always, anytime you go to, pick up to reel in, make sure you set that hook again. So really the only timing would be on the jigging. That's just going to be when that's fluttering back down, you might get a pause. Or it could be on the bottom. And when you go to lift up, it could feel like you're snagged, like it's heavy. Anytime you feel that, just go ahead and set the hook. Even if you are snagged, you're better off getting, because of the way a walleye and saugeye's mouth is made. Most of our sunfish species, our bass, our temperate bass species, our sunfish, our crappie, they have these circular mouths that are meant to expand, create a void and vacuum, and it sucks in. Whereas, a walleye and a saugeye, they still kind of have that shape, but it's almost more of a snout. So when it's kind of like a trout. So when it opens out, it's not creating that same vacuum force that's going in there. And so with the hard roof of their mouth, they have soft pockets in the corners. That's really where you want to try to get that hook. But they can bite down and let go and it's out in an instant. So anytime that you're jigging, if there's a pause in the line, reel and set. Or if you're down on the bottom and you're going to jig up and it just feels heavy, like you're going to pull it, you're like, oh, I'm snagged in mud, or just go ahead and set the hook. Worst case scenario is you lose a jig head. But that's how you're going to miss fish. If you're running a crankbait, if you're trolling, anything where there's movement to the bait, as long as your hook profile is in the back of the bait. That's why with walleye, I don't worry about it with pulling off those trebles in the front, because it's not like a bass that might T-bone it from the side. Most of the time that walleye is going to get right up behind it and suck it down. So that rear trailer hook is going to get them. But keeping your hook towards the back of whatever your bait is. So that's why if you're fishing with just a single hook off the bottom with the night crawler and you're getting bit and it's tap, 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 I just slowly start to reel. I'll pick up the rod and I'll just literally just this slow, just enough to keep that line. And the second that I feel like it's no longer hitting, but I'm tight, the second I get that first feeling of I'm tight to whatever my bait's at, then I go ahead and set the hook. Anytime it's just bouncing around and I keep reeling and it's still bouncing and it's getting slack and then it's tight and slack and tight, I'll just keep reeling until it gets to where I am now tight with whatever I'm hooked to. And then I set the hook. And then it would be the same way with jigging. Just if it pauses, reel up, you feel tension, set the hook. If it's down on the bottom and you start to pull up and you feel tension, reel down and set the hook. So those would be the only tip setting. Other than that, they're going to hammer it when it's moving across the water, and you don't really have to worry about your hookup rate. That's why I love trolling. Trolling is just great for walleye and saugeye for 10 months of the year. And then there's a really good bite in October, especially as we get towards the end of the month, water cools down. That full moon in October is typically the best time to walleye saugeye fish for, any body of water, is that week of the full moon of October for fall fishing. And then It varies by body of water. It's going to start in the southern part of the state and work its way to the north in the spring with spawning. But walleye are going to spawn first. They're going to spawn before any other species. They're a cold water species. So when they spawn up in northern states, they spawn right at ice out. So the second that the ice comes off the lake, they're spawning. So you can look for fish in really shallow water, whether it be below at tailwater, or on the dam or on rocky points, especially the northern points that are getting southerly winds that are blowing bait up. Those are your places to look towards the end of February and then all through March and then into early April. And that's going to be your window. So depending on where you live, what body of water you fish the most, you're going to figure out kind of what that ideal window is each year of when those fish are moving up. Is it 48 degrees? Is it 52 degrees? Is it 56 degrees? What's making them move? And then once you get that, it's always going to be pretty consistent year after year, barring just, crazy weather, something to throw them off. But that's kind of your time of the year where when you're fishing from the bank, you're going to have the most success. Now, you can have success year round for walleye and saugeye in shallow water, but there's just going to be a lot of variables that go into it. Moon phase, pressure, what direction has the wind been blowing, where bait stacked up. All those are going to influence whether or not walleye and saugeye are willing to get up into shallow water in certain areas of a body of water through the summer, late spring, early fall. But once we get into that late fall, or should I say early fall, late summer, as we're moving in when the water temps drop really quickly, once you start seeing overnight lows go from the 50s to the 40s, that's when you see that dramatic shift in water temperatures. So for walleye and saugeye, your peak times of the year to fish from the bank in shallow water with a lot of consistency are going to be the week of the full moon in October, and then that last week of February all the way through the first week of April. But that's just going to vary depending on when those fish are looking to spawn. But typically a spawn's going to last anywhere, 3 weeks on a body of water. So that pretty much figures in if you fish 1 week in between the end of February and the first 2 weeks of March, second 2 weeks of March to the first 2 weeks of April, somewhere in that window, you're going to hit them. And then it's just a matter of year after year, how long do you want to stay on them? Is it the type of deal where you're just looking to go out to fish for a weekend and you're trying to fill your freezer? How many fish are you looking to catch? And that's that late winter, early spring is where you can dial it in. I mean, it could be 2 weeks in a row going to the body of water every day and seeing similar results like you would during a crappie spawn or a white bass spawn or a largemouth spawn. It's just going to be happening way earlier. Those walleye are going to spawn before the next species of fish in the state is even thinking about spawning, which is typically white bass. They're going to go just, them and striped bass, they like a little bit of cooler water. So they're looking to spawn in the mid 50s. But that's still probably 2 to 4 weeks on any given body of water later than what those walleye and saugeye are looking to do for a spawning routine. So that's the time of year to really look for them in that shallow water. And then it's just figuring out your bodies of water after that. So from mid to late April, all the way through, that first full moon of October, what body of water you're at. Do fish come up, maybe around the full moon for that week? That's when they hang out in those shallows. Does it just take a couple of days of driving southwestern winds or southerly winds on a certain point to push bait up to where they consistently come up? Those are going to be specific to individual bodies of water. And then tinkering and tailoring all of the kind of baits that we've talked about of what you're most comfortable with and what you find success with. But we're coming up on that good fall window for walleye and saugeye. So if you have an opportunity to get to a body of water, I recommend, go to our website, wildlifedepartment.com, click on our where to fish pages or our fishing resources page, and you're going to get, where are walleye and saugeye, how-to videos, things like that. And then I'm obviously a resource that you can reach out to whenever. But with that, haven't seen any more questions pop off. We've hit the 2 hour mark, so go ahead and wrap this up. Um, but thanks for coming. Stay up to date with our website, our YouTube channel. We're trying more now of having more relevant seasonal topics about fishing on there, and then pointing you in the right directions. There's lots of anglers out there with lots of great information, and it's kind of my goal to connect all of you with the information that you're seeking, and any type of educational fishing materials that I can provide, whether it be literature or videos or just contacting somebody at a bait shop to talk to. That's what I'm here for. So tight lines. Everybody stay safe out there. And until next time, we'll see you. Thanks for coming.